Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the A-Rate Saturdays College Football YouTube channel. I'm your host, Justin Perez, and today we're going to be continuing our 2023 season predictions for every single FBS team. I'm gonna try to go a little bit quicker today. I'm just gonna go through the games for each team and maybe give a little bit as to why I see them losing a game. I talk about each team a little bit, but I'm not gonna go super in depth because I don't want this to be a super long 50-minute video again. So today we're doing the Big Ten Conference. I'm doing all the Power 5 conferences first in alphabetical order, and then I'll do the Group of 5 conferences when I have a chance. So the Big Ten, obviously there's another 14-team conference that we got to get through. So we're just going to hop right into it. But before I do, I'm just going to explain that since the Big Ten is split into two divisions, I'm just going to be doing the teams in division or by divisions in alphabetical order. So I'll do all the teams in the East Division first, and then I'll do the 7 teams in the West Division first. And West Division after. So East first, and then the West last. The East Division teams will start off with Indiana, Maryland, Michigan State, Ohio State, Penn State, and Rutgers are in the East Division, and Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, Northwestern, Purdue, and Wisconsin are in the West. So we're going to hop right into it, man, with the East Division, starting off with the Indiana Hoosiers. They're head coached by Tom Allen, who's going to enter his 8th year at Indiana. He has a 30-40 record. Last season, Indiana finished 4-8 and 2-7 in the Big Ten. They're not that far removed from a pretty good run in 2020 during the COVID year. They actually played a lot of games that year in the Big Ten, and I think they actually took Ohio State to the limit in that game. But ever since that season, it's just been downhill. Typical Indiana standards, they're mediocre at best. And last season proved that when they finished 4-8 and 2-7 in the Big Ten. When looking at their schedule, I only see 2 sure wins on their schedule, and those are games against Indiana State and Akron. Since they're in the East Division, that means that they have to play Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State. Not an ideal situation there for a team coming off a 4-8 record, but it is what it is. I can see this team realistically getting 1 to 5 wins. It's possible that they could squeak out a few more wins than what I have projected here, but it remains to be seen. So starting off their schedule, they got to play Ohio State at home on opening weekend on September 2nd, and I see them getting destroyed in that game. For obvious reasons, Ohio State is an extremely better team than Indiana is. Then I see them getting a win the next week at home against Indiana State. That's on a Friday on September 8th. They can get that win easily, and then they got to play Louisville at home again on September 16th the next week. I chalk that up as a loss, so they're 1-2, and then I see them getting back to 500 the next week against Akron on September 23rd. Now, it is important to note that Indiana has struggled against teams from the Mid-American Conference, and Akron, although Akron's supposed to be one of the worst teams in the MAC this year, in the Mid-American Conference, it is possible that Akron could squeak out this win on the road. I mean, Indiana is not necessarily a team that is unbeatable for a MAC team, and I've seen Indiana struggle to MAC teams at times. It's interesting to note that Indiana is on a 3-game winning streak against the MAC, but all those previous 3 wins came against Ball State. And even then, in 2 of those 3 games, they struggled mightily against Ball State. They almost blew a huge lead to Ball State back in 2016, I think. But still, I see them getting a win against Akron, and then I see them losing 6 straight games to put them out of bowl contention right away. I see them losing to Maryland on the road. Maryland is their first road game, by the way, on September the 30th. I see them losing that game. Then they go hit the bye week. Then they lose 5 straight coming out of the bye. I mean, they got to play Michigan and Penn State during the stretch, as well as Illinois and Wisconsin. I don't see how Indiana can squeak out wins against Michigan, Penn State, Wisconsin, and Illinois. However, I also put down a loss against Rutgers on October the 21st. That is a game that Indiana could win. I can see them squeaking out a win in that game. But we'll see. But I just gave them a loss because I feel like Rutgers is a better team heading into the season. I did see them picking up a win against Michigan State. I feel like Indiana is going to squeak out a conference win somewhere. And if they're going to squeak out a conference win, they could do it in games against Maryland, Rutgers, and Michigan State. All those teams aren't amazing teams, especially Rutgers and Michigan State, which we'll get to both of those teams pretty soon since they're in this division. But they're obviously having some struggles as well. It is possible that Indiana can get those wins, but I don't know if they're going to do it. But I'll give them a win against Michigan State, and then I'll have them lose the old Oaken rivalry against Purdue on the road to end the season at 3-9 and 1-8 in the Big Ten. So that's where I see Indiana finishing. I believe they are my last place team in the Big East division, the Big Ten East division this year. I just don't see this season going out well for them at all. Next, we got the Maryland Terrapins. They're head coached by Mike Locksley, and Locksley's in his 5th year at Maryland. He has a 21-28 record, and he's built a pretty solid foundation in Maryland for the Terps, and I believe that this could be their best season in a very long time, which I'll get into in a moment. But last season, they finished 8-5. They went 4-5 in the Big Ten, which is pretty good for a team that's not considered one of the true Big Ten teams. Because obviously, Rutgers and Maryland expanded into the Big Ten several years ago. But obviously, Maryland and Rutgers, they're not traditional Big Ten teams. They're the new kids on the block, even still to this day. But they went toe-to-toe with a lot of teams in the past. They've gone toe-to-toe with Ohio State. They've gone toe-to-toe with Michigan. And they've even gone toe-to-toe with Penn State at times. So this team is very competitive against the tougher teams in their division. And they've always been, which is the reason for that 4-5 record in the Big Ten. They won the Duke's Mayo Bowl last season against North Carolina State, which helped them get to their 8th win of the season last year. When looking at their schedule, they should be able to sweep their slate of non-conference games. They got obviously in the Big Ten, teams can only play 3 non-conference games because they played 9 games in the conference. And their non-conference schedule is really a schedule that doesn't ponder any worries at all, and I'll get to that in just a minute, but you can see that on the right side of the screen. You could already tell where I'm going with this, but anyway, yeah, so their non-conference slate is pretty easy, nothing to worry about. And then if you look at their Big Ten schedule, which starts on September the 23rd against Michigan State on the road, it is possible that that they could get to 10 wins this season, because in my opinion, 7 of their 9 games in the Big Ten are winnable games. The only games that I see them not winning at all are the games against Ohio State and Michigan. But that game against Illinois on October the 14th, that can be a winnable game. Illinois, they're a good team, but obviously they're not, Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, so, that Illinois game before the bye week on October the 14th is a winnable game. Realistic expectations, at least, for the realistic expectations meter, as I call it, I would say 6 to 10 wins. I'm being extremely lenient towards Maryland here because I feel like they are an extremely, a really good football team, extremely underrated. So I see them starting off the season at 5-0. They'll beat Towson, they'll beat Charlotte, and they'll beat Virginia. Virginia, I briefly went over them in our ACC conference preview. I feel like they're going to be just a terrible team this season. So they'll get 3 easy wins. Then I see them picking up a win on the road at Michigan State, as well as a win at home against Indiana. So they start off 5-0. And then I see them losing their next 2 games against Ohio State on the road and Illinois. At home, I just feel like they're going to lose that game against Illinois. I just feel like they're going to have a hiccup against the team that they should beat, or that looks to be better than them on paper. I'm not saying that Maryland should beat Illinois, because Illinois is a good football team as well. And I'm going to get to them starting with the West Division pretty soon. But, I just feel like, Axe throwing a loss, somewhere. I just feel like, they're not going to beat all the teams that are winnable games in the Big Ten. But then I see them after the bye week, 3 straight wins. They got Northwestern. They're terrible. Penn State, they got that game at home, and I feel like they will upset one of the top 3 teams in the East Division. And I feel like the team that's most likely to get upset by Maryland is Penn State. And then I see them beating Nebraska on November 11th on the road. Then I see them losing a tough game against Michigan. I see that Michigan game being really close. Like I said earlier, Maryland, they've done a good job against the best teams in the conference. But I see them losing that game against Michigan at home, but then they squeak out the win at Rutgers on the road to finish the season at 9-3 and 6-3 in the Big Ten. Like I said, it's possible if they beat Illinois, they could get to 10 wins, and if they upset another one of the Big Ten's top teams, they can even get to 11 wins. But I have them winning 10 games max. I don't think they'll win more than that, but it's going to be a really good season for Maryland, and it's going to be their best season in a long time. And then moving on to Michigan. Obviously, Michigan, they're coached by Jim Harbaugh, who's coming into his 9th year at his alma mater. He has a 74-25 record, and he's gotten extremely better at Michigan year after year. And he's helped rebuild this Michigan team and return them back to full respectability in a lot of people's eyes, including myself. Last season, Michigan went 13-1. They went undefeated in the Big Ten Conference. They won the Big Ten championship over Purdue, but then obviously they made it to the college football playoff, and then they lost that extremely frustrating Fiesta Bowl semifinal to TCU, and that was the game. That was the game that they turned the ball over multiple times, and they just weren't taking care of the ball. They couldn't get stops on defense when they would score on offense. It was just a really frustrating game against TCU last season. But they should be one of the prime contenders to get back to the playoff this season, because if you look at their non-conference slate, it is extremely easy that they can sweep those 3 games. As you can see there, they have their first 4 games at home, and they should be the favorites to repeat as the favorites, to repeat as the first place team in the East Division. I think a realistic expectation for this team is 10 to 12 wins. They could lose a couple games, especially I'm looking at those Ohio State and Penn State games on the schedule. But I see them going undefeated. I see them finishing 12-0. If you look at their schedule, again, they got those 3 non-conference games. Each of them are against East Carolina, UNLV, and Bowling Green. I don't think that any of those teams would even have a chance against the team that went to the playoff last season and returns most of their players. It is interesting to note, though, that head coach Jim Harbaugh will be suspended for the first 4 games of this season because of recruiting violations. But like I said, that if you're a Michigan fan, don't worry about it. Michigan, they should be able to handle themselves no matter who takes over the head coaching role during the first 4 games of the season. I don't think it's been announced who will be the head coach through those first 4 games. But in my opinion, it shouldn't really matter because, like I said, those are 4 winnable games. So they got East Carolina, UNLV, Bowling Green, and Rutgers. You can scratch those all just chalk them all up as wins. They got Nebraska on the road. Michigan's way better than Nebraska. Nebraska's still rebuilding, and we'll get to them later on in this video. Easy win. Minnesota, that game could be a tough one. I see their first 5 games being blowouts, especially that Nebraska and Rutgers game. But Minnesota could be a tough game because they have a really good offense. And obviously, PJ Fleck, he's given that Minnesota program a lot of stability. But I see them win that game. Then they blow out Indiana and Michigan State easily to head into the bye week at, 8-0, I believe, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 8-0. At 8-0. Then they have the bye week. And then they start their November slate versus Purdue, a rematch of the Big Ten championship game last season. And Purdue, I know they made it to the title game last season, but they're rebuilding. Their team, they're going to be rebuilding this season. They're not going to be extremely terrible, in my opinion, overall, and we'll get to them later. But I don't think they have a chance in this rematch. They didn't have a chance last year in the Big Ten title game, and they certainly don't have a chance now. So again, a win there, and then at Penn State again. That's going to be a tough competitive game, but I see them pulling that out on the road against Maryland the next week. Again, that could be a competitive game, but I see them pulling that out. And then the big one, the last week of the season on November 25th against their hated rival Ohio State. I see Michigan winning that game for a 3rd year in a row, man. I mean, Michigan, I feel like it's okay to predict Michigan to win this Ohio State game over the next couple years, just considering the fact that Ohio State went on that long streak where they beat Michigan every single year. I forgot how many years it was, but it was a long streak. But yeah, I feel like they'll beat Ohio State for the third straight year in a row, which makes them undefeated through the regular season at 12-0 and 9-0 in the Big Ten. Automatic berth in the Big Ten championship game, and we will see later, but they should be in the college football playoff. Next, we're moving on to the in-state rival of Michigan, but certainly the second biggest rival of the Wolverines, and that's the Michigan State Spartans. They're head coached by Mel Tucker, who's heading into his fourth year at East Lansing. He's 18-14 overall in his 4 years at Michigan State. He had a decent start at his Michigan State tenure, but it's been mostly a bumpy road here and there throughout his tenure at Michigan State. And last season was an example of that, as the Spartans finished 5-7 and 3-6 in the Big Ten. They have a decently tough non-conference slate because of that one game against Washington. They are lucky to have that game at home, but we'll get into that game later on. Last year, Washington beat Michigan State, and they play a rematch this year. Realistic expectations, if you're asking me, I can say this team can get a max of 7 wins. Again, in the East Division, they got to play the top 3 teams, and I don't see them at all having a chance against those 3 teams. So we'll start off their schedule. I see them starting off 2-0. Their first game's on Friday night on September the 1st against Central Michigan. That's a win. I don't think Central Michigan's supposed to be a good team in the MAC this season by any means. They could be competitive in this game, but I don't think Central Michigan can beat Michigan State. And then they beat Richmond the next week at home. Richmond from the FCS. I don't have to comment on that game at all. So they start 2-0, and then obviously they got to play that non-conference game at home against Washington. And Washington beat Michigan State last season, and I feel like they'll do that again. Washington's going to be one of the better teams in the Pac-12 conference again this season. I don't know if they're going to be contending truly for a Pac-12 championship game spot, but they could be competitive this season. And I feel like Washington's a better team, obviously, than Michigan State. Michael Penix is coming back for his last season, I believe, at Washington. And yeah, man, I don't see Michigan State win that game at all. So I see them losing that game, and then I see them losing to Maryland the next week to drop them to 2-2. But since this is Michigan State, they always pull off games against teams that they should not beat at all. They do this every single year. And as a result, I'm going to give them an upset win on the road against Iowa on September the 30th. This is Michigan State. Like I said, they always pull off games against teams that they're worse than on paper. And Iowa, they have, Cade McNamara coming in from Michigan to spark a horrendous offense from last season. Iowa was just terrible offensively last season. I feel like they're going to be better, but I see Michigan State pulling off this upset dub, and then they get a bye week. So, they're, on good ground heading into the bye week, and then I see them beating Rutgers. That's a game that they could win or lose, but I see Michigan State pulling off that win at Rutgers to get to 4-2. And then I see them dropping their next 2 games to get to 4-4. They have the home game at versus Michigan at home, but obviously Michigan, we just covered them. They're way better. So chalk that game up as a loss, and I feel like Minnesota's a way better team as well. And that game's on the road, Obviously Minnesota is not a extremely tough place to play, but when you're a team that's teetering on the brink of mediocrity, and when you're still trying to rebuild the program, you're going to lose these games. You're going to lose games against teams, and I think that Minnesota is going to be a phenomenal team this year. I feel like they have potential to get at least 9 wins. Again, PJ Fleck, the coach, he's brought amazing stability into that program, and I feel like they're going to lose that game. But then they'll beat Nebraska to start off their November slate to get to 5-4. Then I see them losing at Ohio State, obviously. And then, I know this sounds crazy, but I see them losing to Indiana on November the 18th. Like I said earlier with Indiana, I feel like they're going to squeak out a conference win somewhere on their schedule. I don't think they'll go winless in conference play. And obviously Michigan State, like I said, they could beat teams that they're not supposed to beat. but the current state of the team means that that they could lose to teams that they should beat. And I see that happening here. Again, you could easily say they'll go 7-5, but I feel like they'll have a hiccup somewhere against the team on the schedule that they should beat, whether it's against Rutgers, whether it's against Indiana. I feel like they'll have a hiccup there. And you could even possibly look at the Central Michigan game as well, as their first game of the season, as a game that they could drop as well. Even though I don't see that happening. But then I see them getting a win at home against Penn State to finish off the season and finish 6-6 overall and 4-5 in the Big Ten again. I know it sounds crazy that I predict them to be Iowa and Penn State, but again, Michigan State every year they pull off games against teams that they shouldn't be. So I'll see them going. I see them going bowling this year, barely with a 6-6 record. But not much else to say about the Spartans. And then we get to the arguable top dog in the Big Ten. We talked about Michigan. Then we're going to talk about Ohio State next. Ohio State, they're coached by Ryan Day. I don't got to go into detail about what he's done at Ohio State. He's done a fantastic job taking over for Urban Meyer over these last 5 years. He's 45-6 overall in his tenure at Ohio State. Last season, they finished 11-2, 8-1 in the Big Ten. But then they lost that heartbreaking Peach Bowl semifinal in the college football playoff to Georgia. If you look at their schedule, their only major challenges obviously come against Penn State and Michigan. So it's realistic to say that they could get at least up to 10 wins. And then obviously max, they could go undefeated during the regular season. I see them starting off 4-0. They have a really easy non-conference schedule. Their toughest game in non-conference play is against Notre Dame on September the 23rd. But, I see them beating Indiana easily. They're going to take down Youngstown State easily. And they're going to take down Western Kentucky easily. So they're 3-0. And then, obviously, their biggest test in non-conference play is the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. But I think Ohio State is way better than Notre Dame. I know. We all know this. Ohio State is way better than Notre Dame. Even though that game's on the road, Ohio State chalked it up as a win. 4-0 heading into the bye week. And then I see them winning out before that Michigan game. I see them being in Maryland, at Purdue, versus Penn State, at Wisconsin, at Rutgers, versus Michigan State, and versus Minnesota to start the season off 11-0. But, we covered Michigan, and I already said that Michigan is going to be the team to go undefeated, which means that Ohio State will lose to Michigan for the third year in a row. This game is going to be tough since it's being played at Ann Arbor. Obviously, Michigan is, one of the toughest places to play. And I feel like Michigan, they're going to keep this going for a while. I feel like they're going to keep being, Ohio State for a while. Obviously, Ohio State could win this game, but I just see Michigan pulling it off. So I see them going 11-1 overall, and then 8-1 in the Big Ten. Again, not much to talk about here when it comes to Ohio State because we all know they're going to be great this year again. The next, in my opinion, the third best team in the Big Ten this year, and that's Penn State. They're head coached by James Franklin, and it's just unbelievable what he's been able to do at Penn State. Obviously, it's been a long time, so it's easy to forget, even with all the success that he's had. But, stepping into a program that had the whole scandal with Joe Paterno, and the whole, issues. I'm not going to get into that because it's obviously very disturbing, and I'm sure everybody knows what happened at Penn State by now. When James Franklin took over. But, he took over, not an easy situation to step in, into, it was very hard to step into a program that had a lot of questions and a lot of bad things going around at the time, but he's righting the ship. He's, raced out to a 78-36 record during his 9 years at Penn State. Like I said, this will be his 10th. Last season, Penn State finished 11-2, 7-2 in the Big Ten, and they beat Utah in the Rose Bowl. Their non-conference slate, when you look at their non-conference schedule, it should be a sweep. They should win all three of their non-conference games. Those games being against West Virginia at home, Delaware at home, and then UMass at home. So yeah, not a tough non-conference schedule at all. And of course, just expect them to be a contender in the East Division. Of course, they're going to be up there with Ohio State and Michigan. They're going to be up there. And, a realistic expectation for them is to get to 11 wins max, 9 wins minimum. So I see them starting off 5-0 before the bye week. They got to beat West Virginia opening week, but West Virginia is not supposed to be one of the better teams in the Big 12 conference this year. And we'll get to the Big 12 during the next commentary, during the next video. But yeah, Penn State's way better than West Virginia, and that is by far their toughest non-conference game. Chalked it up as a win. Chalked the Delaware game up as a win. Chalk the Illinois game up as a win. They're 3-0, even though that game's on the road. And chalk up that Iowa game as a win. So they're 4-0, and then they got to play Northwestern on the road. But Northwestern, we all know what's been going on at Northwestern recently with the whole hazing scandal incidents and all that stuff. And Northwestern, they're just not a good team. They're just not good at all. And we'll get to them. I think they're the last team, or one of the last teams that I'll be talking about in this video. They stink. So, Penn State, they're 5-0 heading into the bye week, and then an easy win against UMass to go 6-0. Then I see them losing in a game against Ohio State on the road in Columbus. It's a road game. Obviously, Ohio State, not the best place to play, especially when you're going to be in a tight race for the East Division crown, and Ohio State is the better team. I do think this game will be close, but by the fourth quarter, Ohio State will just pull away, and I think they'll at least win by 2 touchdowns. But we'll see what happens in that game, but I see Penn State losing that. But then they get the next 2 wins against Indiana at home and against Maryland on the road. Then they lose to Michigan on November 11th. They beat Rutgers, and then on the last game of the season, I see them losing in upset fashion to Michigan State on November 24th, which is on a Friday. That's the only weekday game they play throughout the whole year to finish the season at 9-3, 6-3 in the Big Ten. Not a bad record at all. Obviously not a bad record in the Big Ten. For sure. I know Penn State fans might be disappointed that I at least picked them to lose to Michigan State and possibly to one of those games against Ohio State and Michigan, but again, this is the Big Ten, and in the Big Ten, anybody can pull off a win against anybody. It's been done before, and it will continue to happen every single year. But yeah, I see Penn State finishing 9-3 and 6-3 in the Big Ten. Not bad at all. Pretty good season for them. Then we finish out the East Division with the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Rutgers, my hometown team, living in New Jersey. I've been very aware of Rutgers' football program for a long, long time, and they've been obviously they had some really good years with Greg Schiano, who's still the coach, but that was during his first tenure at Rutgers. This is now his second tenure. But this is his 15th overall at Rutgers. He has an 148-89 record at Rutgers, which is surprising for a coach that coaches at that program, because obviously Rutgers has historically been one of the more mediocre programs in college football. They finished 4-8 last season. Although it was seen by many as a pretty big step for Rutgers, they did finish 4-8 last season, and I understand why many Rutgers fans will view that as a step up, or at least most Rutgers fans will say that. So they finished 4-8 and 1-8 in the Big Ten last season. The non-conference slate can produce 3 wins. Including that opening game against Northwestern. I see them, with their non-conference slate and with that game against Northwestern, they can get up to 4 wins. Realistic expectation, 4 to 6 wins. They could be teetering on the brink of a bowl game, but they have to, they got to pull out 2 more games in Big Ten conference play in order to get there. Their schedule, I see them starting off 3-0. They start their season off on a Sunday afternoon during the opening week of the season on September 3rd against Northwestern. That should be a win. We'll get to Northwestern later on, but they're bad. 9-9, and then 9-9. So September the 9th, they'll play Temple. That should be a win. And then they got to play Virginia Tech at home. I know people are going to say, Virginia Tech, they're in the ACC, and Rutgers, they shouldn't be winning this game. But, Virginia Tech isn't supposed to be very good this season from what I've read. And obviously last year they didn't do very good as well with Brent Pry at the head coaching position. He's still the head coach, and obviously we went over them in the ACC video. By the way, I'll put the ACC video in a card, probably in the upper right-hand corner. But anyway, I see them starting off 3-0. And then they lose to Michigan, obviously September 23rd. I don't see them beating Michigan. Then they beat Wagner easily, so they're 4-1. They're winning. Their first 4 home games of the season is definitely not a thing to sneeze at, no matter who you play against, especially when it's a program like Rutgers, who's trying to get back to some form of respectability and to some form of winning. So they beat Wagner, and then they lose the next 2 games at Wisconsin and then versus Michigan State. So they're 4-3, and then I see them going at 5-3, heading into the bye week with the win at Indiana. That's a game that they could lose, by the way. They could lose to Indiana. They could beat Michigan State as well. Those are 50-50 games, in my opinion, those Michigan State and Indiana games. But I see them losing Michigan State and then beating Indiana to be 5-3. And then I see it going downhill from there, man, after the bye week. And the reason why is because just look at those last 4 games versus Ohio State, at Iowa, at Penn State, versus Maryland, and those are 4 games against relatively good teams. I mean, obviously we all know Ohio State's great. Penn State's a good team. Iowa's a good team. I see them having a really good year, specifically coming off of last year. I mean, last year it's crazy that they got to 8 wins last season, Iowa, with that terrible offense. But we'll get into them soon. And then Maryland, I just went over Maryland. I feel like they're going to be a really good team, and as a result, I see Rutgers losing their last 4 games of the season to finish 5-7. Still, for Rutgers expectations, for Rutgers standards, a 5-7 record, is a big improvement. I'm sure Rutgers fans will be pleased with the 5-7 record if possible. Obviously, I know they'll be ecstatic if they get to a bowl game, but they got to squeak out 2 conference games, man. I see them winning their first 3 games of the season and then that game against Wagner, but they got to get 2 more wins somewhere else. And, the only way I see them getting to 6 wins is if they beat Michigan State and Indiana, because I see all those other games as automatic losses in the Big Ten for Rutgers. But 5-7 overall, not bad for the Scarlet Knights. I see them improving every single year, and this is one of those years where they'll improve. So 5-7, 2-7 in the Big Ten. We're gonna move on to Illinois, which starts off the West Division. So starting off with the West Division, Illinois Fighting Illini, head coached by Brett Bielema, who's 30 year at Illinois, and he's done a phenomenal job at Illinois since he's taken over. Obviously, he was the head coach at Wisconsin for a while. He had some success at Wisconsin. And he's resurrecting Illinois' football program. He's 13-12 in his heading into his 3rd season. Last year, he went 8-5, which was a phenomenal year for Illinois, although it ended on a sour note as they lost the ReliaQuest Bowl to Mississippi State from the SEC. Their non-conference slate will be a little bit challenging for Illinois standards. I know it sounds funny, but, Illinois has never been a program that makes you think, they should beat this team or they should beat that team. But, they should beat some teams on their non-conference schedule. They could beat all 3 teams on their non-conference schedule. But as you see, I have some shocking results, some shocking predictions that I will get to. So their non-conference slate is challenging. They got a good Toledo team. I know, Toledo's from the MAC, but they're going to be a great team this year. And they got to play Kansas. However, there are plenty of winnable games on the slate for Illinois. So they don't have to play Ohio State. They don't have to play Michigan. And they do not have to play Penn State. So 3 of the best teams in the Big Ten they do not have to see this year. So there is some hope that they could have not a bounce back year, but a breakout year if last year's season was not a breakout year. But anyway, I see them realistic expectation 6 to 9 wins. They could get to 9 wins, but a lot of those games are games that they could lose this season. And we're going to start off with that right now with the schedule. Again, I know Toledo's from the MAC. I know they're a group of 5 team. I know that the Big Ten is a Power 5 conference. I know that people are looking at this right now and saying, oh my God, you're picking Illinois to lose against Toledo? But in reality, Toledo's a phenomenal team. And obviously, MAC teams from the MAC, they've given a lot of trouble to teams in the Big Ten. Even Ohio State had some tough games against the MAC, for a few years throughout their history. But yeah, man, Toledo, I see them winning the MAC championship this year. So they're going to beat Illinois. I feel like they're going to upset Illinois on the road. And then I see them losing to Kansas the next week. I'm really high on Kansas this season. I know Kansas is not supposed to be a phenomenal team this year, but they're going to have a dynamic offense led by quarterback Jalen Daniels. And I just see Kansas being pretty damn good this year. So I see them losing that game, and then they lose to Penn State to drop to 0-3. Shocking turn of events. Shocking start of the season for Illinois in my books. But here we go. I see them winning 5 straight games, starting off with their September 23rd tilt at home against Florida Atlantic. I see them beating Purdue. I see them beating Nebraska. I see them beating Maryland on the road, and then I see them beating Wisconsin. I know that game might seem crazy. I know that one game might seem crazy, beating Wisconsin. But again, it's the Big Ten. Anything can happen in the Big Ten. And I feel like Brett Bielema eventually is going to beat his old team in Wisconsin. I just feel like it's going to come soon. So I'm just throwing it out there. Bold prediction. A couple bold predictions for Illinois. At least on my end. But yeah, I see them beating Wisconsin heading into the bye week. They're 5-3. Then I see them losing a tough game on the road at Minnesota. Obviously Minnesota, they're going to be a good team this season, and Illinois is going to have a hiccup somewhere in Big Ten Conference play against a team that, they should be competitive against. But I see them beating Indiana easily the next week. Then they lose to Iowa on November the 18th. And then I see them picking up a really good, an easy win to finish the season at home against Northwestern on November 25th. So I see Illinois finishing 7-5 and 6-3 in the Big Ten. Solid season overall. It is possible that they could get to 9 wins again. That those Toledo and Kansas games to start the season, they're winnable games. I just see them losing those 2 games in a close fashion. But again, those 2 games could be wins. So we could be looking at a scenario where Illinois is 9-3, finishing the regular season at 9-3. It is possible it is possible that Illinois could finish with 9 wins. But like I said, I just feel like they're going to get upset to start the season a couple times, but then they'll bounce back. They'll have that long winning streak through the end of September and through the middle to late portions of October before they kind of teeter, between wins and losses to end the year. But 7-5 record and 6-3 in the Big Ten for Illinois is my final prediction. Next, we're heading over to Iowa with the Iowa Hawkeyes. They're obviously head coached by longtime boss Kirk Ferentz. Ferentz is heading into his 25th year at the University of Iowa. He's compiled a record of 186 wins and 115 losses, very close to 200 wins. I'll be keeping an eye on Iowa to see if Kirk Ferentz gets extremely closer to 200 career wins at Iowa. Last season, they were just, I don't even know what happened last season, man. Iowa, the fact that they even got to 8 wins last season, in my opinion, was a miracle because their offense was historically bad in many different areas. That it was just shocking to me about how bad their offense was. But they went 8-5 last season, 5-4 in the Big Ten, and they actually shut out Kentucky in the Music City Bowl. I actually saw Kentucky beating Iowa last season in the Music City Bowl because of how terrible their offense was. But that just goes to show you how phenomenal their defense was last season, and I feel like they're going to be really good this season again. Every Big Ten game is winnable for Iowa. They got to play Penn State, but that's the only top team that they have to play on their schedule. They got every other game is against teams that has some question marks. A lot of these teams could be very good this season, but I see Penn State as a possible victor in all of their Big Ten games this season. I don't think they're going to win all their Big Ten games this season, but it's possible. And their non-conference slate, I mean, come on. It's 3 easy wins. They got to play Utah State, they got to play Western Michigan, and then they got to play Iowa State. Iowa State should be a pretty competitive team this season, but I think Iowa's way better than the Cyclones. So reasonable expectation, I would say 8 to 10 wins. I don't think they're going to go undefeated. Obviously, that's ridiculous, but I'm just throwing it out there. If they beat Penn State, and if they don't have that hiccup against Michigan State like I see them having, it is possible, especially if they get by Wisconsin and Illinois, because those are some two tough games. But I see them finishing 10-2 and 7-2 in the Big Ten, as you see on your screen. I see them starting off 3-0. I see them beating Utah State, Iowa State in the Cy-Hawk rivalry game, and then Western Michigan. And then they lose the next two games to Penn State and Michigan State. The Penn State game seems more reasonable, like they'll lose to, but I feel like they're going to have a hiccup against, one of these lower Big Ten teams, and Michigan State is it. But then they went out the rest of the way. They beat Purdue, they beat Wisconsin, or they upset Wisconsin. They beat Minnesota. Then they have the bye week. Then they easily get past Northwestern and Rutgers before beating Illinois closely, in my opinion. And then they get by Nebraska on the last game of the season, which is a Friday night in Lincoln on November the 24th. So yeah, I see them finishing 10-2. There are a lot of questions surrounding the offense, but I feel like they will get better because, unlike last year, they actually upgraded the quarterback position with Cade McNamara, who comes over from Michigan. I don't think I mentioned this, but J.J. McCarthy is supposed to be is going to be the starter for Michigan. So with McCarthy at Michigan, McNamara transferred to Iowa, and I feel like he's going to help that offense improve. And I mean, anything with the offense should be better than last season because, my God, they were just horrendous. But yeah, I see them finishing. I see Iowa finishing 10-2 and 7-2 in the Big Ten. Now, when it comes to Minnesota, they're a very tricky team to predict because they have a lot of games on their schedule that are what I call 50-50 games. They're head coached by P.J. Fleck, who's in his 7th year at Minnesota, and he's helped resurrect the Minnesota program that's been seen as mediocre for years before he got there. He has a 44-27 record. They made it to the Outback Bowl a few years ago as one of the better teams in the Big Ten. Last season, however, they went 9-4, which is still pretty damn good for Minnesota standards. But they finished 5-4 in the Big Ten. But they won the Pinstripe Bowl against Syracuse. So obviously, that 9th one coming in the Pinstripe Bowl. They have a lot of tough games, especially a tough non-conference road tilt at North Carolina in their 3rd game of the season. 7 of their 9 Big Ten games, though, are winnable games. Realistic expectations, 7-10 wins. They could get to 10 wins, but I think it's going to be very tough, but it is possible. Starting off their schedule, I see them beating Nebraska and Eastern Michigan to start 2-0. I see them losing to North Carolina, but then they get a couple easy 2 wins against Northwestern on the road and versus Louisiana Lafayette. And then I see them losing to Michigan before the bye week. So 3-2 before the bye week. Then I see them losing to Iowa, as we just covered. Then I see them going on a streak of 3 wins to become bowl eligible. At 7-3, I see them beating Michigan State, Illinois, and Purdue on the road to be 7-3. And then I see them losing, unfortunately, their last 2 games of the season to Ohio State and Wisconsin. Obviously, Ohio State, they're going to beat Minnesota, but Wisconsin's a game that they could win. That's why I said that they could get up to 10 wins, because the North Carolina game they could win, the Iowa game they could win, and the Wisconsin game they could win. But I see them losing all those 3 games to finish the season at 7-5 and 5-4 in the Big Ten. Pretty good season for Minnesota. Obviously, it's a regression from the 9 wins they have last season, but they have a lot of tough games on their schedule. But I still see them going bowling at 7-5. Next, we got Nebraska. They're head coached by Matt Rule, and Matt Rule, this is his 1st year at Nebraska. He's coming over from the Carolina Panthers of the NFL, and obviously his stint with the Panthers in the NFL wasn't all too great. However, his college track record proves that this could be the man that leads Nebraska back to relevance, because he turned around Temple. And then he helped resurrect Baylor's football program as well. So he did it at 2 programs. I wouldn't be surprised if he's able to do it here with Nebraska as well. Last season under Scott Frost, they finished 4-8 and 3-6 in the Big Ten. They fired Frost for another coach, but I forgot his name. I didn't write it down, obviously, but it doesn't matter. They finished 3-6 in the Big Ten, 4-8 last season. They have a potential 3-1 start. Looking at their non-conference schedule, and they play a lot of tough Big Ten games, but Going to a bowl game is possible for Nebraska. I see them finishing from 5 to 7 wins as my realistic expectation. I see them starting the season off with a loss at Minnesota on Thursday, August 31st. But then I see them picking up 3 straight wins at Colorado, then versus Northern Illinois, and versus Louisiana Tech. Obviously, their non-conference schedule is tough because they got to play Colorado, who's been reinvigorated since Deion Sanders got there as the head coach, and obviously Colorado's going to be a better team. They're going to be a more competitive team just because of Coach Prime being the head coach. But I see them picking up that win. Then Northern Illinois, obviously, I talked about them a bit in the Boston College portion of the ACC video. They're going to be really good this year, in my opinion. But I see them picking up a win. It's going to be a close game, but I see them picking up a win. And then I see them beating Louisiana Tech rather easily on September 23rd. Then I see them losing back-to-back games to drop to 500 at 3-3 before the bye week. I see them losing to Michigan and the Friday game at Illinois. But then they pick up the next 2 wins against Northwestern and Purdue. But then I see them losing their last 4 games of the season to finish 5-7 and 2-7 in the Big Ten. I see them losing at Michigan State versus Maryland, at Wisconsin, and versus Iowa. I think all those teams are better than Nebraska. But it is possible that they could beat Michigan State to get to 6 wins. I see them possibly beating Minnesota and possibly beating Illinois, but I don't think that's going to happen. But Nebraska's going to be an improved team this year from what we've been seeing over the last few years. They're going to be an improved team. They're going to be better. They're going to play better. And I feel like the defense under Matt Rule will get significantly better because obviously Matt Rule was a defensive coach, and he's had a lot of good defenses throughout his college career, especially at Baylor. So I feel like they will be competitive in a lot of these games. They don't have to play Ohio State. They don't have to play Penn State. So, it is possible that they could go bowling. It is extremely likely that they could go bowling, but I just see them not getting the breaks. Part of the reason why Nebraska struggled a lot over these last several years is because they haven't gotten, the bounces. They haven't gotten good breaks. They've lost a lot of close games. And I feel like that will continue to be the norm, at least for this season for Nebraska. But like I said, it will be an improvement. Cornhusker fans, they will see an improvement with their team this season. Just give it time, give it patience. I feel like Matt Rule is going to turn Nebraska once again into a college football powerhouse. But yeah, this season it's going to be another rough year for Nebraska, but I think it's going to be a big step forward. Then, obviously, with the team that has the biggest news recently in the Big Ten, the Northwestern Wildcats. They're head coached by David Braun, who's in his first year. I mean, it should be Pat Fitzgerald who should be coaching this team. But obviously, if you've been following the news lately with college football, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding the Northwestern program. And, Pat Fitzgerald got fired recently, several weeks ago, because of the hazing allegations and the hazing scandal going on at Northwestern. So that's why David Braun is penciled in as the head coach. Last season, Northwestern was absolutely horrendous. They went 1-11 and 1-8 in the Big Ten. Their only definite win on their schedule this season is a win against FCS Howard on October the 7th. In my opinion, they will go winless in the Big Ten Conference, and my realistic expectation for them, I see the most wins they could get is 2. I know it sounds bad, but that's because it is bad. Me, as a college football fan, I've always rooted for Northwestern, so it kind of pains me to be this negative about Northwestern, but the facts are the facts. The truth is hard to accept sometimes, but the reality is that Northwestern is just not a good team, and especially with the whole hazing allegation stuff going around, there's just a lot of negative publicity on that program right now, and I feel like that will carry into the season, even with the new head coach and a new possible coaching staff and all that. I just think that's going to hinder them this season a lot, and they're not that talented. I see them losing their first 5 games to Rutgers, UTEP, Duke, Minnesota, and Penn State. It's possible that they could beat Rutgers. It's possible that they could beat UTEP, but I see them losing both those games. That's how bad they are. And again, Northwestern, they've always had difficulty playing against teams from smaller conferences, which is why I have that UTEP game chalked up as a loss. I just don't. I mean, again, it's possible that they could win against UTEP, but I don't know, man. Right now, this program, it's in a mess right now, and I don't think that's going to be solved anytime soon. So yeah, I see them losing those first two games, then to Duke, Minnesota, and Penn State. Then I see them beating Howard before the bye week, which means that they're 1-5 in the Big Ten, or not in the Big Ten, but 1-5 overall before the bye week. But then I see them losing out the rest of the way. They got games against Nebraska, Maryland, Iowa, Wisconsin, Purdue, and Illinois. Those are a lot of good teams on that schedule that Northwestern really has no chance against. I'd be stunned if they at least win a game in Big Ten conference play. Because even when it comes to the Rutgers game, I feel like Rutgers is way better than Northwestern. I'd be stunned if they get a win in Big Ten conference play. I see them finishing 1-11 overall and 0-9 in the Big Ten. It's just bad. Expect them to be bad this season. It's just going to be a bad year. Now, the last two teams to get through before we recap another long audio recording. But that's what happens when you squeak in 14 different teams in one video. But Purdue, they have a new head coach in Ryan Walters. Obviously, they brought in, they made some changes. Ryan Walters comes in, obviously his first year. There's a lot of optimism for what he could do at Purdue. Last season, Purdue went 8-6, 6-3 in the Big Ten, and they lost the Big Ten championship game to Michigan, although that really wasn't a shocker at all. That was expected by everybody for them to lose that game. But then they lost the Citrus Bowl to LSU. They have a tough overall schedule, a brutal Big Ten stretch, man. They have a brutal stretch from September 22nd all the way to November 11th. They just think it's gonna hammer them hard this season. Realistic expectations, I can say they could get up to 8 wins possibly, but I don't see that happening. But it is a realistic possibility they could get up to 8 wins. A lot of people are saying that Purdue is in now rebuilding mode because they lost a lot of their top players through the transfer portal and through the NFL draft during this past April. It's obvious that they're in a rebuilding phase. Although I see them getting, wins in their first 3 games against Fresno State, at Virginia Tech, and versus Syracuse. That Big Ten slate, man, really ruins things. I mean, it's possible that they could lose to Fresno State or Syracuse because Fresno State obviously they're a phenomenal team in the Mountain West. They won the Mountain West title last year, I believe. They're always going to be around. Fresno State's always one of those Group of 5 teams that's always competitive against Power 5 conference teams. So it's possible they could lose that game. But I see them going 3-0 to start. And then I see them losing their next 7 games from the Wisconsin game all to the Minnesota game. It's possible that they could squeak out a win against Illinois and against Nebraska, and possibly even against Minnesota. But I just don't see that happening, man. I think all those teams are better. Well, not all those teams. I don't think Nebraska's better than Purdue. But, again, that's a 50-50 game, the Nebraska game. Wisconsin, they have a new coach, obviously, which we'll get to coming up next. That could be a win. Illinois could be a win. They're not unbeatable. Nebraska, Minnesota. But, those are all teams that I see Purdue losing to. A lot of those teams are way better than Purdue, and a lot of those teams are not that much better than Purdue, but they could beat Purdue as well. So I see them losing 7 straight, but then I see them finishing the season with 2 cupcake conference games against Northwestern and Indiana. Indiana and Northwestern, they're not good. They should beat those teams relatively easily, especially Northwestern. So I see Purdue finishing 5-7 and 2-7 in the Big Ten, but it is possible that they could squeak out a few extra wins and possibly go bowling. And then, last but not least, Wisconsin, the Badgers coming into the season, they got Luke Fickell as their new head coach. Obviously, Luke Fickell coming over from Cincinnati, and obviously Cincinnati, they went downhill. But a couple years ago, Cincinnati had that magical run to the college football playoff. They made it all the way to the playoff. They were one of the top 4 teams. That was such an amazing run. That was an experience that I will never forget as a college football fan, watching them go all the way to the playoff. But a new coaching staff means a new system. But it is possible that Wisconsin can be successful right out of the gates, because if you look at their schedule, again, they have to play Ohio State, but no Michigan, no Penn State. That's a plus. And their non-conference schedule really is favorable. They have the potential to win the West Division, but it all comes down to that game against Iowa on October the 14th. Their realistic expectation is 7 to 10 wins. They could get to 10 wins. They could be 10-2 this year. But I feel like they'll have a couple hiccups during the conference season. Last season, they won 7-6 and 4-5 in the Big Ten, but they won the Guaranteed Rate Bowl versus Oklahoma State. But I think it's obvious that Wisconsin needed a fresh slate. They needed a new coaching staff. They needed a change. Everything was, going downhill, and they made that change with Luke Fickell as the new head coach. So I see them starting off 3-0 and non-conference play. They'll beat Buffalo from the MAC. They'll beat Washington State, sadly, because I love Washington State. But I see Wisconsin beating Washington State. So I see them starting off 2-0, and then they'll beat Georgia Southern. Georgia Southern, that game could be a tough game because they are a good team in the Sun Belt Conference, but I see Wisconsin pulling that out. I see them struggling a little bit early on, but they could pull away in the fourth quarter. Then they have a bye week, and then, before the bye week, they got to play Purdue, but I see them beating Purdue on that Friday night game. Then they head into the bye week at 4-0. Then they beat Rutgers to get to 5-0, but then they lose. But then I have them going on a 3-game losing streak to Iowa, Illinois, and Ohio State. I feel like I think that Iowa game is going to dictate who makes it to the Big Ten championship game. I think that game's going to dictate who's the West Division representative for the Big Ten title game. But I feel like Iowa, they're going to be better. I mean, their defense. I mean, we talked about Iowa just recently. I mean, again, their defense was amazing last year. They're going to be great this year again, in my opinion, and they seem to have upgrades at the offense. So, I see Wisconsin losing that game within the next two. But then they got to play Indiana and Northwestern. Those are two easy wins. You can chalk those up, which means they'll get to 7-3. Then I see them beating Nebraska and then beating Minnesota to finish the year at 9-3 and 6-3 in the Big Ten. Again, it is possible that Wisconsin could make it to the Big Ten title game, but they have a couple of tough games on their schedule. That 3-game stretch in late October is really, really tough, man. But yeah, it is possible that they could get to the Big Ten title game, like I said. Yeah, man, I feel like they're going to have a really good season this year with Luke Fickell, and I feel like Wisconsin's going to rejuvenate a lot of that, attention back to the program, and they're going to get back on track and become the Wisconsin Badgers that we all know once again this season. So that's about it for the Big Ten. Now to recap the Big Ten standings in the East Division, I have Michigan winning that division at 9-0. Then I see Ohio State finishing second place at 8-1. Penn State is third place at 6-3. Maryland is fourth at 6-3. Michigan State is 4-5 and at fifth place. Rutgers finishes at 2-7, so that means they're sixth place, and Indiana finishes in dead last place with a 1-8 record in the East Division. Then in the West Division, I see Iowa coming out of that and winning that division with a 7-2 record. Then I see Illinois and Wisconsin finishing tied for second at 6-3. Then I see Minnesota finishing fourth at 5-4. And then I see Nebraska and Purdue tied for fifth at 2-7. And then I see Northwestern all alone in last place at 0-9 in the Big Ten West Division. As far as my Big Ten championship game prediction, I see Michigan beating Iowa to capture their third straight conference title and make it back to the college football playoff. So that's going to be it for the Big Ten predictions. Another long video, I apologize, but like I said, that's exactly what happens when you squeak in 14 teams in one video. Have a lot to get through. I tried to go as fast as I can, but unfortunately we're at the hour mark once again. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to comment, like, and subscribe. let's keep the momentum going on here on the Air Raid Saturdays YouTube channel. Like I said in the ACC video, I have a lot of interesting plans for this channel, and I'm hoping to take this channel places. So if you can, just subscribe, comment, and like the video, and share it as well. Get this spread around. Let's keep this momentum going. I'll be back soon with the Big 12 conference predictions. I'll be doing the Big 12, then the SEC, and then the Pac-12 in that order. So I'll finish out the Power 5 conferences, and then I'll get into the Group of 5 conferences and the independents. I'll probably do the independents after I finish the Pac-12, because Notre Dame is an independent, and I'm sure people want to know how Notre Dame is going to finish in my estimation this season. But yeah, so I'll put this out as soon as I can. Then I'll do the Big 12 conference next, and then I'll wrap up the Power 5 with the SEC and the Pac-12. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and I'll catch you on the flip side. I'll see you next time.